If something goes wrong with it, we have back. I'm just kind of waiting. I'm waiting to see if we're ready to go. I might have to check with Diane. They might be trying to deal with crowds moving. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Yeah, she's up here.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our 24th annual Blavat Lecture hosted by the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College. Let me begin by extending the heartiest expression of gratitude to the Blavat family, which has brought forward to this campus this remarkable lecture now for 24 full years. They have introduced us to conversations with leaders who helped shape the fabric of American society, and we are so much better for this lecture. And please join me in again expressing our gratitude to the Blavat family. Tonight, we are gathered on a campus shaped not only by its people, but also indelibly by its place in the American story. Steps away from where we are seated, President Abraham Lincoln gave voice to America's promise: the government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. And it is in that spirit of civic commitment, reflection, and action that our college's mission continues to guide us today. This evening, we will hear from a leader who is deeply committed to Lincoln's promise, and who is leading his own consequential life, one that is benefiting the lives of countless others. I am, of course, speaking about our keynote speaker, David Rubenstein. David, is back there. Welcome to Gettysburg. We are honored to have you here. Our community is entwined with our nation's highest ideals, and David, as I hope you have heard today, the American story is also so central to what marks Gettysburg College. In fact, it's what drew me here nearly 7 years ago. It lives in our legacy of devotion made visible by the battlefields that surround us. It lives in the enduring address spoken by President Lincoln at the invitation of a member of our Board of Trustees, words that continue to echo off the halls of our campus and that shape who we are as a community. It lives in the example set by President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who made Gettysburg his home and wrote his memoirs in our alumni admissions house. And it lives in how we educate our students, preparing them to grow as leaders and the socially responsible citizens that our country needs. David, it's all too fitting that you join us today as our nation embarks on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Because while you were widely known as and celebrated for your extraordinary business success, in my eyes, what truly distinguishes you is something even more profound. It's your unwavering belief in the promise of the American democracy and the bold actions you have taken to preserve it. You have given so generously of your time, your talent, and your resources to safeguard our most treasured symbols of freedom: the Washington Monument, the National Archives, the Lincoln Memorial. Each gift, each effort, serving as a reminder that democracy must be both remembered and renewed. Each gift, important symbols of our democracy, but more than that, a call to action, a physical reminder that democracy thrives only through the active participation of its members. Here at Gettysburg College, we believe that too. We teach our students to live a consequential life, to embrace the responsibility of rising to the, quote, unfinished work of their time, of building a more just and more vibrant society. We teach them to engage not only as bystanders, but as architects of their own destiny. And we teach them that democracy is not self-sustaining, that it requires principled individuals who understand that freedom must be protected and preserved. In so many ways, David, your lives exemplify this very stewardship. Justice Thurgood Marshall once said, quote, "This is your democracy. Make it, protect it, pass it on." And that is precisely what you have done and for which we are deeply grateful. Tonight, we come together in no ordinary place and at no ordinary time. Let us commit to walking together in the footsteps of our founding fathers, of Lincoln and Eisenhower, and of engaged citizens like Mr. Rubenstein who have dared to imagine a better future for our nation and for our world. Thank you. With that, I am pleased to introduce Susan Eisenhower. Susan is an expert in residence at our Eisenhower Institute, an accomplished author and international policy consultant, and of course, the granddaughter of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Please join me in welcoming Susan.
Thank you, Bob, very much. I must say he's been a wonderful leader for this college. Bob, thank you for all you have done and for your vision for not just the college, but the Institute as well. It's a personal pleasure, really, for me to welcome David Rubenstein to the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College. Over the years, I've been honored to be interviewed numerous times by David on my book, How Ike Led, the principles behind Eisenhower's biggest decisions, and to be part of his best-selling The Highest Calling. I remember well each of those occasions, but I must thank him again for that magnificent occasion at the Library of Congress where David interviewed me about my book and the legacy of Dwight Eisenhower. What a wonderful opportunity he gave me to help bring Dwight Eisenhower to life in the company of so many members of Congress. This is the kind of thing that David Rubenstein has done for so many authors of American history, and for that we will always, always be grateful. It seems fitting to have David Rubenstein here on this 250th anniversary year. David's intellectual contribution to the study of our nation's history and his philanthropy in assuring the maintenance and sustainability of iconic memorials, documents, and institutions has put him into a class by himself. Even in a difficult place like Washington, everyone recognizes the enormous, enormous territory he has carved out for bringing history into the lives of Americans all over the country. It is simply impossible to imagine what our public discourse and historic memory would be today if not for David. He has shown and modeled both success in business and also a reverence and respect for the Constitution of the United States and the imperative to remember and to leave our nation better than we found it. Thank you, David, for honoring us with your presence this evening. Gettysburg is a unique small town. Here, two great Americans left their indelible marks on this community, the nation, and the world. And the 100-year history of this town marks the key moments of the 19th and 20th centuries in America. The Battle of Gettysburg was one of the turning points of the Civil War, including Lincoln's address where he outlined in a few short words the values and hopes of our nation. Later in the 20th century, the architect of D-Day and Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe accepted the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany and went on to have a two-term presidency. And after that, he came to this community, not any other, but this community, paid taxes in Adams County, Pennsylvania, served his community, and hung out with his grandchildren. Over the years, he brought some of the century's most pivotal strategic leaders to the Eisenhower farm, just 3 miles down the road. Winston Churchill, Charles de Gaulle, Nikita Khrushchev, First Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, and more came to visit. In addition to these historic connections, Gettysburg also played its role in the Revolutionary period, in the Underground Railroad movement, to the site of Eisenhower's command of the first U.S. Tank Corps at Camp Colt during World War I. And it was also the site of a German prisoner of war camp in World War II. To say it in other way, Gettysburg is the story of America. For these reasons and more, the Eisenhower Institute merged with Gettysburg College in 2009 to bring this perspective to undergraduate students who will one day be part of other pivotal moments. Today, the Eisenhower Institute serves as a bridge from the past to the future while connecting the world of liberal arts to the world of work. There's literally and so now I would like to introduce Jeffrey Blavitt and the Blavitt family. I'd like a round of applause for Jeffrey Blavitt, who was our first executive director, and for many years helped get this enterprise on its way. And so it seems, and if you'll forgive me for 1 minute, I have lost my place. I'd like to say that this gives me an opportunity to introduce Tracy Potts, our current executive director. Tracy came to the Eisenhower Institute in 2021 and has done a magnificent job continuing Jeffrey's work and expanding it considerably. We have seen expansions in all levels of programming, and thanks to her, we had a marvelous opportunity to establish the Washington Summer Seminar program that has enabled countless Eisenhower Institute participants to make connections on Capitol Hill, develop new creative opportunities in the workplace, and to serve not only on Capitol Hill, but at federal agencies, within corporations, and also at nonprofits. This is an extraordinary legacy that the Eisenhower Institute has brought to Gettysburg College. And again, we are thrilled to have Tracy tonight provide an introduction and some question and answers for David after what I know will be an extraordinary lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and good evening, everyone, to our in-person and our virtual audience tonight. I am not David Rubenstein, and I know you did not come to hear me speak, so I will be as brief as possible. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge that I know a lot of you are here because a few of you told me you are big Orioles fans. I know we have some Orioles fans in the room, including our baseball team, which is somewhere in the room tonight. Excellent. Great to have you here. And the basketball team, I'm told, is here tonight as well. Awesome. We're so glad that you're here tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to very briefly say a word about the Eisenhower Institute at Gettysburg College, which, as Susan noted, connects young aspiring leaders with public policy experts to discover their passions and tackle society's most challenging problems and most challenging issues. We are nonpartisan, and we are inspired by President Eisenhower's approach of engaging diverse people to find common ground and take action. Our vision is to prepare young adults for a lifetime of public, private, and nonprofit service, to lead with integrity, to be responsible citizens, and to inspire the world to meaningful action. We achieve these goals through, as Susan noted, expert-led seminars, fellowships, and experiential learning opportunities. Now, about the Blavitt Lecture. Since 1996, this lecture series has brought to Gettysburg College individuals whose professional experiences provide first-hand perspectives on the American political system, while emphasizing the importance of public service based upon truth, justice, and civil discourse. This lecture has included influential members of Congress, well-known writers, accomplished authors, talented educators, noted researchers, and tonight, David Rubenstein, our speaker. I am honored to introduce him to you tonight. Mr. Rubenstein is an investor, a philanthropist, an interviewer, an author, and an historian. He is co-founder and co-chair of the Carlyle Group, one of the world's largest and most successful private investment firms. Established in 1987, Carlyle manages $474 billion in 27 offices worldwide. And as many of you know by now, he is a native of Baltimore and proudly supports and invests in his community, including leading the group that purchased the Baltimore Orioles, where he currently serves as chairman, CEO, and principal owner. A recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, Mr. Rubenstein's board service is extensive, including the Council on Foreign Relations, the National Gallery of Art, and the Economic Club of Washington. He is a well-known leader in patriotic philanthropy, having made transformative gifts for the restoration or repair of many of our national treasures, as Bob mentioned earlier. An original signer of the Giving Pledge, Mr. Rubenstein distinguished himself in the media world as host of the David Rubenstein Show, Bloomberg Wealth with David Rubenstein, and a number of other programs and podcasts. Tonight, please join me in welcoming our 24th annual Blavitt Lecturer, Mr. David Rubenstein.
Thank you. Please lower your expectations. I'm not nearly as good as the people that introduced me said I was, so lower your expectations of what you're going to hear. I'm honored to be here. And how many people here are students at Gettysburg now? Okay. How many people are graduates of Gettysburg? How many people are faculty at Gettysburg? How many people want their children to go to Gettysburg? Okay. Well, I'm honored to be here. What I wanted to do tonight is talk a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. As we celebrate what is called the semi-quincentennial, can everybody say that? Semi-quincentennial. That's the 250th anniversary. What is it we're actually celebrating, and why are we celebrating it? And what's actually in the Declaration of Independence, and why should we care about it? I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the Declaration in 30 minutes, okay? So, think about this. Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492. Why don't we celebrate that as the beginning of our country? Well, he didn't actually make North America, so we kind of ignore him for this purpose. What about St. Augustine was founded as the first colony in the United States by the Spanish in 1565, I think it was, 1665. And why don't we celebrate that? Well, because they're Spanish and we're really a British country to some extent when we began our roots. Why don't we celebrate 1619 when the British sent people to go to Virginia, or 1620 when they landed in Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts? Well, they really just were colonizing it. They didn't really have a country, so we don't celebrate that. Why don't we celebrate the Constitution? The Constitution became part of our law in 1789 when it was ratified. Why don't we celebrate that? We live under the Constitution. We don't live under the Declaration of Independence. So why don't we celebrate that? Or why don't we celebrate the Bill of Rights, which is so important to our Constitution? Why don't we celebrate when that was ratified? Well, we don't do that. Why don't we celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation when we finally got rid of the scourge of slavery to some extent? Why don't we celebrate that? When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in January of 1863. Why don't we celebrate the 13th Amendment, which legally ended slavery in the way that the Emancipation didn't quite? Why don't we celebrate that? Or why don't we celebrate other dates that are significant in this country's history? We don't do that. We celebrate 1776. Why do we celebrate that date? Well, think about it. What happened in 1776? Well, that's two things that are significant that might be worth noting. One, on July the 2nd, 1776, the Second Continental Congress actually passed a resolution that said we're going to break away from England. We're going to break away. And that was very revolutionary and unanticipated just even a year earlier. So the night of July the 2nd, John Adams, who had been the principal proponent of passing this resolution, along with Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, John Adams wrote to his wife, Abigail, and said, we will celebrate July the 2nd for the rest of history, because that's the day we'll celebrate. It's the day that marked the beginning of this country. But actually, it didn't really mark the beginning of the country because we weren't recognized by anybody else, and we had to fight a war to become a country. And, you know, we didn't win the war until 1781, and not until 1783 was the Treaty of Paris really signed. We don't recognize those dates either. We recognize 1776. Why was John Adams wrong? Why, when he went to his wife and said in a letter, we're going to celebrate July the 2nd, why don't we celebrate that date as opposed to July the 4th? Well, let me explain the reason. On July the 2nd, when they finished the resolution saying we're breaking away from England, that was an act of treason. And the delegates then, about 56 white Christian property-owning men, no blacks, no Jews, no women, no Hispanics, all white Christian property-owning men. Most of them, about half of them were lawyers, which is, you can say that's good or bad, depending on your point of view. They took up a document that had been drafted earlier in anticipation of the idea that the July the 2nd, the resolution would pass. A committee was formed in the Second Continental Congress, and it was formed at the behest probably of John Adams. But John Adams was put on the committee. Also, a man named Robert Livingston from New York, who ultimately was the person who swore in George Washington as the first president of our country. Another man, Roger Sherman, who was from Connecticut, and he was the man who actually came up with the famous Connecticut Compromise, which enabled, under the Constitution, us to have two houses of Congress, one proportional representation and one where everybody has 2 votes or 2 seats. That was his idea. He was on the committee, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and an old guy named Benjamin Franklin, and then a young man from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson. He was only 33 years old. He didn't want to be there. His wife was ill. She later died very young, and he didn't want to be there, but he agreed to be there in part because the other members of the Virginia delegation had gone back, and he had to be there representing Virginia. So these 5 people got together, and they decided we have to explain why we're going to break away, assuming the vote occurs. Assuming the vote occurs in favor of breaking away, and it was a unanimous vote. New York wasn't able to vote because they were being invaded by the British, but it was unanimous, those who were there. And they said we need to have some kind of explanation of what we're doing. So they gave this job to Thomas Jefferson. Why? Well, John Adams was better known and older, and he was probably the real intellectual force of the Second Continental Congress. But Thomas Jefferson was a better writer. He was known for being a pretty good writer, not a good speaker. He didn't talk publicly very much at all. In fact, as President of the United States, he only made 1 public speech. He didn't like to talk in public, high-pitched voice, nervous as a speaker. So, but he was a very good writer, and he had written some other things that were very good. He'd written recently the preamble to the Virginia State Constitution that he was working on, and he was thought to be a pretty good writer. But John Adams said to him, as John Adams said later, "You are from Virginia, I'm from Massachusetts. People from Massachusetts are seen as really wanting to break away from England, and we have to make it clear it's not just a bunch of people from Massachusetts. So you would be better to write it, and you're a better writer than me, and also people like you, and they don't like me so much." So they gave it to him to write. Now, like most humans, when you're given a task, and was given the task around, I think it was around July, probably around June 11th or so, and he was told around June 11th or 12th or so, you write this explanation of why we're going to break away. Well, most people would do what he did. He did other stuff. He was very busy. He was on 45 different committees at the Second Continental Congress, so he didn't do it until the last couple of days. Like any of you who are students, you probably wait till the end. Well, he waited till the end. And then he sat down, and he was in a boarding house in Philadelphia. He sat down without any text or anything. He basically wrote out the Declaration of Independence. Now, he had some things in mind that he knew about. George Mason had written a document in Virginia that was relating to the rights of people in Virginia. Thomas Jefferson had written, as I mentioned, the preamble to the Constitution of Virginia. So he had some ideas, and he kind of said, I'm going to take the ideas that we already have, and he had some ideas from European philosophers, John Montesquieu and others, and he wrote this document up, and then he wrote it up. And remember, in those days, if you copied ideas from other people, it wasn't considered plagiarism. It was considered something that you were proud to have been able to use the works of somebody else. Today, we might consider it plagiarism, but that wasn't a thing in those days, no plagiarism. So he took ideas from other people. He didn't say that it was his original ideas. It was the ideas that were around at the time. And then when he turned the document in, he turned it in to the other members of the committee, and Benjamin Franklin edited a little bit. John Adams edited a little bit. So at the night of July the 2nd, after they finished the vote to break away, they wanted to have this explanation. And so they then took up the document that Thomas Jefferson had written. And then they spent all day, the rest of July the 2nd, July the 3rd, and July the 4th debating it. Now, Thomas Jefferson sat there as they made changes. They made 86 changes in his document. He didn't say a word. Why? He was a shy speaker. He didn't say one word. He was very upset. Benjamin Franklin sat down next to him and said, don't be worried. This happens a lot. It's not a big problem. Nobody's against you for not writing the perfect document. Nobody can write a perfect document. We got 50-some other people we have to please. So they made these 86 changes. They shortened it a little bit by about 25%, and they took out one major part in it. Thomas Jefferson had written that the King George had forced the slave trade on the colonies, and obviously that wasn't true, and and the Southern delegates didn't want to have slavery even mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, and they realized anything about slavery that was negative about slavery would be something that they couldn't sell to their own constituents. So they took that out. July the 4th, night of July the 4th, they finally agreed to the text. And they went to a printer the next day, John Dunlop, and asked him, a 28-year-old man who had a little printing press, and with Benjamin Franklin and others helping him, Benjamin Franklin being a famous printer, they printed up a document. They printed up 200 copies of what's now called a Dunlop document, Dunlop Declaration of Independence. And they then took this document and they sent it to George Washington to read to the troops, sent it to King George, sent it to all the key colonies to read. What was in the document? Well, as Thomas Jefferson had written it, it had 3 parts to it. And the reason the Declaration is important today is because of one part. The first part was the preamble. And most of you know preambles are nice, but you kind of skip over them. You don't really pay that much attention to them. The second part was the gist of it. And Thomas Jefferson had written 21 things that King George had done wrong. Now, why did he criticize King George? King George honestly wasn't running the British government. It was being run as it was the parliamentary system. And the Parliament was really imposing the challenges to the colonies that they didn't like, the taxes and the other kinds of things that the colonies didn't like. And the reason that taxes were being imposed, in case people forget the history, is this. After the French and Indian War was won and was over in 1763, the British said, wait, we've defended the colonies, these 13 colonies. We didn't charge them anything. Now they don't have to worry about the Indians coming in. They don't have to worry about the French taking over. But we got to have troops there to defend the colonies, and we'll keep troops there, but it's expensive. So let's charge them something. Let's have some taxes. Well, the colonies didn't like that. They hated the idea of taxes. They'd never been taxed before in a direct way. So their series of taxes went back and forth. I won't go through all of the different types of it, but it went on for a dozen plus years or so. And ultimately, the colonies revolted against it. And ultimately, the colonies did things like the Boston Tea Party in 1773, which upset the British even more. And eventually, the British sent more troops over. And eventually, there was fighting at Lexington and Concord, where the British sent troops over, and ultimately, some American colonies personnel were killed, and some British soldiers were killed, and that really began the real serious fighting. And so, although we were fighting before we actually issued the Declaration of Independence, we were fighting in 1775, and people were killed, we hadn't actually declared our independence. And the reason we hadn't was most people in the colonies didn't want to be independent. They viewed themselves as British citizens. They always had viewed themselves as loyal to the King of England. And so they didn't really think that they were going to be independent. They didn't think they were Americans. They didn't think they were anything but British citizens. And then eventually, a publication occurred early in 1776 called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. He was a British citizen, but he wrote this document that was the fastest-selling publication in the history of America. Common Sense sold about 130,000 copies in just a few weeks when the population of the country was only 3 million people. And so this began to say, in Common Sense, it said we ought to break, you colonies ought to break away. Before that, in 1775 and 1774, this first Continental Congress had said, let's stay, what can we do to make the king happy? What can we do to get the British to leave us alone and not tax us? And they tried many different ways to persuade the king not to do anything that was going to be unfriendly to the colonies, but they couldn't persuade him. They got no response, and so that's why they really voted in 1776 to have the Declaration of Independence. The preamble to that declaration was ignored at the time because they really focused on the sins of King George. They focused on King George because the American colonies saw themselves as subject to the King of England. The King of England had issued the colonial charters. The Parliament hadn't done it. And they didn't want to really be part of the Parliament, saying they were reporting to the Parliament. They thought they were subject to the King of England. And so they wrote this Declaration of Independence addressed to the king. And in it, Thomas Jefferson had 21 charges, things that he said the King George had done wrong. Stationed troops in our colonies, had interfered with our elections, interfered with our judicial system, a whole variety of things. And ultimately, the delegates to the Continental Congress got it down to 19 charges. So the big thing was the preamble was ignored by and large, then the 19 charges, and then the conclusion, we're going to break away. Today, nobody remembers what was in the charges pretty much, and everybody remembers we broke away. But what we remembered about the Declaration of Independence, the reason we celebrate is this. There was a sentence in there that became the most famous sentence in the English language. And the sentence is, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." What did Jefferson mean by that? Well, he never defined happiness, but it wasn't quite giddiness. It meant the right to be able to live a life where you can do what you want with your life without interference from government, more or less is what he meant. And he wrote that sentence, and it wasn't paid attention to very much at the time. And obviously, it was a little strange to write it because he was a slave owner. He'd owned 600 slaves in the course of his life, and he said all men are created equal. How can that be? Well, what he really meant was all white men are created equal. He didn't mean black men were created equal, and he didn't say all women were created equal to men either. He really meant all white men are created equal. And what he meant by created equal is in the state of nature, when people are born, they are all, in his view, equal. Obviously, they don't have equal rights or responsibilities, but that phrase became famous because later on, many decades later, as other revolutions occurred in Europe and around the world, people went back to that language. And they said all men are created equal, meaning all people are created equal, with the right, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And that is why the Declaration of Independence became so famous, because of that language. It inspired other people around the world to do things to break away from tyrants or from governments that they thought were improper. It was in this city that the document became even more famous, because when Abraham Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg Address, what he said was 77 years ago, referring back to the Declaration of Independence, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, that was very controversial for Lincoln to say that, because many people in the North said, wait a second, we're fighting to keep the Union together. We're not fighting to say that blacks and whites are equal. And it was controversial at the time, but that was what Lincoln believed. Lincoln believed that the Founding Fathers had a concept that everybody would be equal in some theoretical sense. And so Lincoln revived the Declaration in many ways, because after the war was over and the Revolutionary War had been won, and the Declaration was largely forgotten for decades, basically people didn't really spend much time on paying attention to the Declaration, but Lincoln kind of revived it when he talked about it and made it so important to part of his Gettysburg Address. So what happened when the Declaration was issued? Well, what happened was Mr. Dunlap printed up 200 copies. They were read in various places. There are only about 25 of them left today. One of them was found, there were 24 that were known. One of them was found in an attic a couple years ago, and it was bought by Norman Lear. And Norman Lear toured around every state in the country, and he said it was the birth certificate of the United States, and he basically had it toured around. He made a big to-do about it, and then eventually he sold it. And he was supposed to be sold at an auction, and the auction didn't actually occur. And so one day Norman Lear called me about something else. He said, David, Sotheby's sold my rare copy of the Dunlap copy, of which there are only 25 left. Were you the person who bought it? I said, no, I wasn't offered to me. But then about a week later, I was in somebody's house, and I saw it. And I said, that must be the copy. It's a perfect copy. I knew it's the exact one that Norman Lear had. So I went to the person who owns the house and said, you just spent $25 million buying this Declaration, right? He said, no, I would remember if I did. I said, you sure? No. So he called me the next day and said, I forgot I did buy it. It was Bill Gates, and Bill Gates owns it. So anyway, what happened was, after the Declaration, the Dunlap copy occurred, that was just printed. And nobody really signed it. John Hancock signed it. He was the president of the Continental Congress. But they wanted to have an engrossed copy. Engrossed means it's kind of in calligraphy. And they wanted to make sure everybody signed it. Now remember, signing this was treason. So if you signed it, you could well be hung. And therefore, they were not afraid of signing it, but they didn't rush to sign it, let's put it that way. And so they said New York State hadn't yet voted for independence because they were being invaded by the British. So they said, let's come back in August the 2nd, in Philadelphia. And then what we'll do is, everybody by then, you come here on August 2nd, we'll have the document written in nice calligraphy, and you can sign it. And they did. Most of them came back, and they signed it. That's where John Hancock's famous signature is. and was signed by some 50-some other people. But they didn't release the signatures. They didn't release this document. They didn't release it, some people say, because it was treason. They finally got around to releasing the names of the people who signed it in January of 1777, when they had already won a few battles in Trenton and other places. They thought maybe they had a better chance of winning and treason wouldn't be so dangerous, perhaps. But they finally signed it, and on August, that document, which is signed, is the original copy. It is in the National Archives. But for many years, it was folded up, put in sunlight, not paid attention to. It's faded beyond recognition. Beyond recognition. If you go there in the National Archives, you can't see it, what's there. Recognizing that this might happen and seeing that it was getting faded, John Quincy Adams, when he was Secretary of State, the son of John Adams, said we ought to have copies that people can see of this great document. How can we get a perfect copy made? There was no xerography then, so how do you get a perfect copy? Well, they found a printer in Washington, Mr. William Stone, and he came up with a process, not quite clear even today how it worked, but essentially took a wet cloth, more or less, put it on the original document, took the ink off, and then put it on a copper plate. He made 200 copies of that. And when you see in the New York Times on the 4th of July a copy of the Declaration of Independence, you're seeing what's called a stone copy. I bought many of those, and I probably own more than anybody else in the country, and I put them on display in places so people can see them. And when you're seeing the Declaration of Independence today, whenever you see it, you're most likely seeing a so-called stone copy, which has the calligraphy, has all the signatures and so forth. Now, over the years, the Declaration was largely forgotten, because we won the war. The war was over in 1783. We got on with the Constitution, and the Declaration was not the operating document of the country. The Constitution was. And then what ultimately happened was people began to think more about the Declaration over the years, and initially Thomas Jefferson was so upset that all the things he had written had been changed. Remember, he had some 80-some changes, that he never really admitted for a while that the document was his, because he thought that the other people in the Continental Congress had mutilated his document. They'd mutilated it, he said. In fact, he was childish in some respects. He would take his version of what he had drafted and the version that the Congress had put together and send to his friends. And he'd say to his friends, don't you think my version was better than what they did? And he did the same thing any of us would probably do. But he didn't really talk about it. And then later, as the Declaration became a little bit better known in the 1820s or so, he admitted that he had been the principal author of it. Though, interestingly, what he wrote and what is now in the original Declaration is changed a fair bit. So he wasn't the author of it, really. He was the person who composed the original draft, and it was heavily edited. But he took credit for being the author. And in fact, on his tombstone, the first thing he says on his tombstone is, author of the Declaration of Independence. Now, this upset John Adams a fair bit, because John Adams said, wait a second, I could have been the author of the Declaration of Independence. If I'd known all the glory was going to go to the Declaration of Independence authors, I could have written it. So for the ensuing 50 years after the Declaration was signed, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson sparred a lot. A lot of it was, in fact, they didn't talk for about 25 years, but they sparred over what was more important, the vote on July the 2nd or the vote on or the document on July the 4th. And ultimately what prevailed was July the 4th, because we didn't celebrate July the 2nd. I'll tell you why in one moment. So Thomas Jefferson and John Adams sparred a bit, and interestingly, they both died 50 years to the day, July the 4th, 1826. Both of them died on the same day. And it was seen by Americans as a sign from Providence that God really favors America, because these two great last signers of the Declaration of Independence lived until exactly 50 years to the day. In fact, on his deathbed, Adams said, Jefferson still lives, when in fact Jefferson had died a couple hours earlier. And today, the Declaration of Independence is a document that we honor in part because of this famous sentence in it that really has inspired so many other people. Jefferson himself took great credit for having drafted that sentence, though it was slightly edited. He didn't actually write that sentence quite that way. It was written slightly differently, but he took credit for it. And Adams felt maybe he should deserve more credit. But anyway, that's why we celebrate the Declaration of Independence, because of that sentence. But why don't we celebrate July the 2nd? Well, here's what happened. On July the 2nd, 1777, the day that we were going to celebrate for the rest of our history, the breaking away from England, the delegates were still in the Second Continental Congress. They forgot. They were busy. They forgot the date. They forgot the calendar. So at the end of the day, they said, wait a second, we should have celebrated this July the 2nd. Let's get around and organizing it. So they got around to organizing it, and they celebrated on July the 4th. Since July the 4th was seen more as Thomas Jefferson's day than John Adams' day, John Adams wasn't happy that the 4th became the day that we celebrated. And in 1870, the United States Congress finally said it's in effect a national holiday, and we made it an official national holiday. But that's why we celebrate the 4th, not the 2nd, but it doesn't make a difference. The truth is, what we're celebrating is the fact that this country broke away from tyranny, broke away from the right to, it give us the right to be able to be free, to have freedoms, liberty, and the kind of things that we want. Now, as we all know, the document was flawed. The document didn't do anything to say anything about slavery, and we had many flaws in our system for a long time. But what we're really celebrating now, we're celebrating the fact that this country became the most important country in the world. Think about this. We had 3 million people in 1776, 500,000 slaves, and 250,000 white people. And this little country, with 3 million people, 13 colonies, and only on the East Coast, became the most powerful country in the world in terms of the economy, technology, education, military power, anything you want. We became the envy of the world for so long. And so the reason we're celebrating the country is because of what we've achieved and what this country's done for so many years, typified by what was in the Declaration of Independence. Although we didn't really honor it initially by saying that all men are created equal, we have tried to live up to that. And that's why we really still celebrate the Declaration of Independence. And that's why we're really celebrating this country's history, because it became the greatest country in the world, the envy of the world. We obviously have some challenges today, but clearly it's a country that nobody really wants to leave. We have 50 million immigrants in this country. They're one of the strengths of this country. No other country in the world has more than 6 million immigrants. So people want to come here because of what we've achieved over these 250 years, and a lot of that is symbolized by the Declaration of Independence. So that's more than you probably wanted to know about the Declaration of Independence, but let me end there and just say I want to thank you all for listening to my explanation of why we celebrate the Declaration of Independence and why we celebrate the 4th of July, not the 2nd of July, and why I hope all of us are proud to be Americans, despite the fact that we have some challenges ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That may be the best history lesson we've had in this classroom in a while. That's fantastic. I appreciate that. Yeah,
okay.
It's good to know.
So what can I tell you?
Okay, so you can tell me about you, because you've told us about the Declaration of Independence, and I think a lot of people here are very interested in learning a little bit more about you and the man behind it.
I'm not sure they are, but what would you like to know?
So let's start with, I want to talk about Baltimore. I hear you talking about it quite a bit. You obviously are very proud of where you came from. Can you tell us a little bit about your connection to Baltimore, growing up there?
Yeah.
How did that shape your character?
Well, very often if you see somebody that is a business person or is interested in the kind of subjects I'm interested in, you say this person came from a wealthy family or something like that, perhaps, an educated family. I did not. My father dropped out of high school to go into World War II. He came back, he met my mother. They married at the unseemly age of 20 and 17. It seems awfully young to me. I was born more than 9 months later. And I was the only child. My father, because he didn't have a college or high school education, worked as a blue-collar worker in the post office his entire career. And so I was the only child. We grew up in a very small house, 800 square feet. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, no backyard. And some of you may not have probably had circumstances even less august than that. But it's an advantage in growing up in that kind of setting in some ways, because you're more driven. My children have grown up in a wealthier setting, and obviously, while I think they're all doing God's work by being in private equity now, they are, they're probably going to be hard to have the drive that I've had. So when I got lucky in the business world, I basically decided to try to pay back the country and give away my money, basically, to ways to remind people of the country's history and heritage.
And is that where your love of history started, particularly for historical documents?
What happened was this. I, as a young man, I didn't have the good looks, the charm, the money, the charisma of a candidate. And I thought, okay, I'll never be a candidate. I'll never be John Kennedy. When I was in the 6th grade, my teacher went through the inaugural address of John Kennedy with me, and I thought it was a brilliant address. I later learned it was largely written by a man named Ted Sorensen. And so I wanted to be like Ted Sorensen, an advisor to a president, not the president himself. I didn't think I could do that. So I went to work after I graduated from law school for the law firm in New York that Ted Sorensen was working at, thinking his pixie dust might rub off on me, and I would go to work in the government as an advisor to a president. I thought that'd be the highest calling I could have. And then I went to work for a man he told me would be next president of the United States. Had a pretty good chance. His name was Senator Birch Bayh. He was running in 1976. I went to work for him as chief counsel, and he dropped out about 30 days after I joined his Senate operation. I thought my political acumen wasn't so great. And then I got an interview, and some of you young people here should take advantage of any calls you get like this. I got a call from somebody who said, you want to work for another presidential candidate? And I said, well, I just didn't help one. Who's this one? He said, his name is Jimmy Carter. I said, that's the peanut farmer from Georgia, right? He's never going to be president. Trust me, he's not going to make it. But I went to work because it was, something to do. I got the job. I went to work for Carter's campaign in the general election. And when I went to work for Carter, he was 34 points ahead of Gerald Ford. And when I finished, Carter won by 1 point. But Carter said, what was your contribution? I was way ahead before you showed up. But White House staffs are not filled on merit. We've seen that from time to time. They're filled on who worked in the campaign. So I'm in the campaign. My boss became the domestic advisor. I became the deputy domestic policy advisor to the President of the United States at the age of 27. I wasn't qualified for the job, but Carter wasn't qualified to be president. So I fit in. I actually had never met Carter. In the campaign, he was busy traveling. I didn't even know him. I was like 4 weeks into the White House. I have an office in the West Wing, and I hadn't even met Carter. But eventually, I managed to get inflation to 19%, which is hard to do. And we didn't get reelected. But I remember telling Carter, you have no chance of not getting reelected because although we have hostages in Iran, we have gas lines, we have high inflation, you're running against an old man. He's 69 years old. And I'm older than that now. 69 seems like a teenager to me today. But at the time, in fact, we'd love to have a president only 69 now. But by the time he seemed old, I was wrong. And so I went back and practiced law. And because I lived in Washington and I work in the White House, when you work in the White House, you get a sense of history. And so as things came along, one time I went to view a document in New York. Somebody asked me to view a document as a kind of a social thing. And it turned out the document was the Magna Carta. And the very clever curator said, by the way, this is going to be sold tomorrow. It's the only copy of the Magna Carta in private hands. It's going to be sold tomorrow, probably to somebody from Russia or Saudi Arabia or some other country she mentioned, Mongolia. And, of course, she was trying to get me to buy it, I guess, because she wanted to stay in the United States. So I went the next night. I bid on it. And, I'd never been to Sotheby's before. I get there. They put me in a little room. You start bidding. And then I'm listening to the phone. Everybody's bidding, I thought. And then they said, well, you haven't bid. Are you going to bid or not? I said, well, okay, here's a bid. I gave the bid, and then 1 second later, they said sold. So I bought it, but I didn't know if anybody else was actually bidding against me. But so I bought it, and then I gave it to the U.S. government as a gift to kind of down pay my obligation to give back to the country. And it's the document that was the inspiration for the Declaration of Independence. And then I started buying other historic documents, the Emancipation Proclamation, the Declaration of Independence, things like that, the 13th Amendment. Then the Washington Monument had its earthquake damage, and I said, I'll fix it, put the money out to fix it. I started fixing up buildings, and the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, Mount Vernon, Montpelier, and on the theory that when you have these historic documents and you have historic buildings, people will be inspired to remind themselves more and learn more about American history. The theory of history is that if you learn about the past, you can avoid the mistakes of the past if you learn about them and learn about the good things that were done in the past and maybe do those in the future. So my theory has been that if you look at a computer slide of the Washington Monument, it's not the same as actually seeing it. If you look at a computer slide of the Magna Carta, it's not the same as actually seeing it. So I want people to kind of see these original things and hopefully learn more about history. Right now, when I was in college, about 9% of undergraduates majored in history. Now it's about 1.5%, because people are afraid if you're not a STEM major, they're not going to get a job. So I'm trying to get people to think more about history, learn more about history, and it can't hurt. That's how I got involved in it a bit.
Well, this is a great place to do that because this is a place where we care a lot about history. By the way, I know that many of you had question cards, or you may have questions. If you have those cards and you have a question, please give them to the students who are designated around the room, because we'll take some of their questions and answer those as well. So let's make a left turn a minute and talk about baseball.
Okay.
You went back home and bought your hometown team. How'd that come about?
Well, when I was a little boy, I played in Little League. It was a Jewish Little League, so it wasn't probably, I didn't think that many Sandy Koufaxes were coming out of my Little League. But, and I was an all-star, but everybody was an all-star. I think, I remember these things, everybody gets a trophy. Well, I got a trophy, I was an all-star. But I think everybody in the league was an all-star. And then my athletic career peaked at about 9 or 10, and so I just wasn't that good. And then I did go out to play baseball, junior varsity in my high school in Baltimore. Big high school, 1,500 people in the class. I went out, 1,400 people were competing for the junior varsity baseball team. And after I did a pretty good job, I thought, fielding and hitting, the coach came to me and said, you have a lot of potential. Now, when you hear the word potential, you know that you're not going to like the next sentence. And so I said, well, I have potential. That's great. What does that mean? He said, I'd like you to be the manager. The manager. I'm not really qualified to be the manager. I'm only 14 years old. No. The manager gets the equipment, brings it to the games, and that's your job. I said, geez, I don't want to do that. So I kind of got out of baseball and thought baseball had passed me by. But I've given away a fair amount of my net worth in philanthropic purposes, but I don't think I did enough for Baltimore. Baltimore is where I got a public school education. My parents lived there. My parents are buried there. I'm going to be buried there. And I just thought I should do more for Baltimore. I've been on the board of Johns Hopkins for many, many years, but I just thought I could do more. So Baltimore is a city that has a lot of challenges. When I was growing up, it was the 9th biggest city in the United States, and now not in the top 25 in terms of population. It's now a city that has real demographic challenges. Major corporate headquarters have moved out, high STD rates, crime rates, murder rates, drug rates. It's got a lot of challenges, and I thought Baltimore Orioles unite the city in ways that very few other things do in Baltimore. So if the Orioles do well, it's more important to Baltimore than if the Yankees do well. It's to New York. New York is going to do quite well if the Yankees don't do well. Baltimore really can rally around the Orioles, and we haven't won a World Series since 1983. So I thought if I could buy the team, put some money into it, and maybe make it better, it would help Baltimore. That was the theory behind it. But I don't really know that much about baseball compared to what I should know. So, when I was growing up, baseball was a pitcher or a hitter had batting average, home runs, hits and things like that. Now they have all these mathematical algorithms and so forth. It's much more complicated for me to understand what they're talking about. I've got to go to math school, and everything is so complicated now. But I've been involved now for 2 years. I didn't do a very good job because I bought the team. They were in first place in the American League East when I bought them. Now they're in last place. It's very hard to go from first place to last place, but I managed to take the team from first to last place. So this year, in the offseason, I spent a lot of money. We bought, Pete Alonso. Yes, $155 million. $155 million. I hope he's worth it. The salaries are incredible today. Yeah. When Brooks Robinson was with the Orioles, he was the greatest third baseman of all time. The peak of his salary, the highest salary he ever got was $100,000. And Johnny Unitas, the peak of his salary was $200,000. Today, the contracts are staggering. And so I'm trying to learn the business, help the Orioles, and we're redoing the stadium. We redid the stadium was built in about 30-some years ago. It was revolutionary at the time. Now it's a little dated, so on the off-season, we've double the size of the scoreboard. We've made it much more up to date, and we've done some other things to make the seating more appealing and fix the dugouts and the clubhouses and some other things. So hopefully people come will like the experience even more. But in the end, everything gets down to performance on the field. If you don't do well in the field, then people aren't going to show up. Last year we had 400,000 people fewer show up than we did the previous year. So I want more 400,000 people to come back, and it's enjoyable. But it's being an owner of a baseball team is good. I've written a book about it. It's coming out in September about what it's like to be an owner of a baseball team and owner of a sports team. I've interviewed other owners. It's fun, but it's different. And Carlyle, my private equity firm, could buy a company that has $10 billion of revenue, and I can walk down the street, nobody asks for my picture. The Orioles are, these are small businesses, relatively speaking, and there's no profitability in these things either. So people are more interested in my Orioles than they are in the $10 billion companies Carlyle owns. It's just a different thing. People obsess over sports, and the sports teams are very, very popular around the country, around the world. And so I own one little team. Many of my friends now own a lot of other teams, and they're much more profitable. But I'm going to try to do what I can to help Baltimore Orioles do as well as they were years ago when we won 3 World Series.
I mean, of all the impressive things that you've done.
Well, but this one,
of all these things that you've done, it seems like this one is fun.
Well, this one is fun, but it's a funny thing. I go to the games and people are cheering me. Like I didn't really do anything yet. And the little boys come up and they want me to sign something. I said, look, I'm not really, I'm not a player. They don't know who I am. I'm signing them, and I'm not really good at, when you're learning to learn cursive in Baltimore public schools, I think they were taught on Jewish holidays, so I didn't go, and I don't really know how to write cursive, so I had to print everything, and because I'm a lawyer, I always put the date in, and people make fun of me putting date on my autograph, but I'm signing all these things that maybe they're on eBay or something, I don't know, but I don't want to tell kids, look, when I was a little boy, I tried to get autographs, and some of the players would never sign them. And I remember all the Yankees, when they would come in town, I'd go to them to the Lord Baltimore Hotel and wait there for all the players. All we would sign, except one player rushed in, and he would never sign it. And I didn't know why he was rushing into the elevator with his wife. But it turned out it maybe wasn't his wife. So he didn't want to be seen stopping for my autograph. That was Mickey Mantle. But if somebody asked me for a selfie or autograph, I always do it. Try to be polite. I go out and throw hats into the audience, into the fans, and try to be part of the fabric of it. And it's enjoyable. But, I'm not a spring chicken. I probably can't do this forever, so I'm enjoying it, but it's more enjoyable if we can win. And so hopefully we'll win. Spring training starts soon, and I'll go down there and I'll show the players how to hit. And, but the players are really, really young. And I mean, these are young players. And, nobody at Carlisle is as young as the players I have. So, like, for example, one time I had to go make a speech on prostate cancer for Mike Milken, and we're having it at one of the stadiums. And I get there early, and I'm talking to the players, and they say, what are you doing here so early? I said, I have to make a speech on prostate cancer. And they said, what's a prostate? I said, you'll find out eventually. But these guys are young, and so it's hard to relate to a 22 or 23-year-old athlete, but I'm doing the best I can. I mean, I make speeches, I talk about Jefferson and Lincoln, and I don't think they know who these people are. Yeah. But I don't know.
Well, here they do.
Maybe they do.
Yeah. Can we talk about presidents for a minute? You walked
Yes.
right into what I wanted to talk about. So your latest book, The Highest Calling, Conversations on the American Presidency.
Right.
You've talked to a number of people, including Susan, about President Eisenhower.
Right.
Do you have a favorite?
Well, I came of age as a boy with President Kennedy, and I admired his great eloquence, and I admired many other things. Obviously, a lot of things that come out subsequently, you'll learn not quite as perfect as I would have wanted, but I was the chair of the Kennedy Center for 14 years. President Trump is now the chair of it. I've been involved in the Kennedy School at Harvard and very involved at the Kennedy Library in Boston, so I probably done more to support his name than probably any other president, but I worked for Jimmy Carter, and I've Joe Biden I've known for a long time, and I know President Trump. I know them all. I've interviewed them all. They all have their pluses and minuses, and they're all humans in some respect, but what I like about it is that when you live in Washington, you really respect the presidency, and while it's had some challenges of late, it's still an office that I think people generally look up to. We've had some great people like Lincoln hold that office.
You said that you wrote this book, The Highest Calling, to educate people about this office, about the presidency. What are the best takeaways? What do you want us to learn? And what did you learn after those conversations?
Well, think about it. The President of the United States is the most important person in the world. I used to say the highest calling of mankind was private equity, but obviously it's probably not. Highest calling, think about it, when this was first realized by people, as I say in the book, when Woodrow Wilson went to Paris to end World War I in the Treaty of Paris conference, he was cheered by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Paris. Why? Because he was coming to bring peace, and people recognized that the President of the United States was the most powerful person in the world. And ever since Woodrow Wilson's time, whoever's the President of the United States is by far the most powerful person in the world. And so getting to know these people and getting to know their pluses and minuses is interesting to me. And as I live in Washington, I interact with some of the presidents from time to time. It's a source of great interest to me.
Yeah. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Eisenhower because, well, my boss and his granddaughter are sitting right there.
President Eisenhower is a really incredible person in the sense that he came from a family with a lot of brothers. Wasn't clear that he had the money to really go to college. He went to West Point, that paid for it. He played football and tackled Jim Thorpe in one of his games. He had a reasonable career, but at the age of 52, he was a colonel, and World War II broke out for us in December of 41. In March of 41, he was 52 years old and really not likely to go anywhere. He hadn't been in combat in World War I, and so he wasn't a combat veteran. And then, for a lot of circumstances beyond his control, perhaps, he kind of rose up. He was admired by many people, and then he He ran D-Day and then the Battle of the Bulge. He also previously run the wars in Africa and Italy, and was so admired by his colleagues that they thought he should be President of the United States. And he didn't want to be President of the United States. Truman said to him, I'll give you the Democratic nomination. He didn't want it. Eventually, he ran in 1952 and won overwhelmingly twice. And think about this. I remember as a boy thinking, boy, this is an old man. Old man. How old was Eisenhower when he became president? 62. 62. He looked old, but he was young. And he finished when he was 68. And he lived to be just a few years older than I am now. I think he died at the age of 78. And he was a man who, no real scandals. He didn't worry about making money for himself. He just wanted to help his country. And he's somebody that people admired because he was self-effacing, self-made man, really helped us win World War II. What had happened if we lost World War II? So I think Eisenhower is somebody people should admire because he was not only a very great general, but also a president who kept us out of wars and kept the prosperity and did so many other great things.
You described him in your book as popular but not dynamic. But then you said, as time went on, with perspective, you really came to appreciate him. So my question is, do you think that will happen with modern day presidents as well? Will we have a different perspective of Trump, Obama, Biden, in the same way?
Not in this millennium, I wouldn't think. No, it's a different situation today. Maybe some things will come out that I don't know about, but I would say my former boss, Jimmy Carter, was very unpopular. He lost the re-election 489 votes to 49, 489 to 49 votes. Humiliated. He actually went through clinical depression and had no money. He was almost bankrupt when he left office. And yet in the 44 years after he left the presidency, 11 times as long as he was president, he resurrected his reputation, won the Nobel Peace Prize without lobbying for it. He did so many things to monitor elections and eliminated Guinea worm and river blindness in Africa. So he's a role model in many ways and a Renaissance man for all the things he did. So his reputation's come back. Harry Truman was written out of Washington. He was so unpopular that nobody wanted to pay attention to him. When he left after Eisenhower was sworn in, he just carried his own bags to the train station and left. And nobody ever thought they'd hear from him again. And when he came back to Washington, he drove his own car back to Washington, stayed in a Holiday Inn on the way. And then now his reputation is much, much better for all the things he did. So reputations change over a period of time. I don't know that the current president's reputation will get better, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. I will take those audience questions when we get them. I think we have a few. But in the meantime, I want to talk to you a minute about leadership. Right. Because we have leadership programs. We talk a lot about developing leadership in our students. But you have, and in our young people in general, but you have, particularly in your interviews, you've interviewed a lot of leaders. You've been described as one yourself. How do you define what makes a great leader?
Well, a leader is somebody that has followers. You can't be a leader if nobody's following you. But how do you get people to follow you? Well, all of life is really about persuading people to do what you want. You can't be a leader if you can't persuade somebody to follow you. How do you persuade somebody? Well, you learn how to talk well. You don't have to be Martin Luther King at the Lincoln Memorial, but talking reasonably well, learning how to persuade people by the oral voice, or learn how to write well. You don't have to be Lincoln writing the Gettysburg Address, but learning how to write well can influence people, can persuade people. But the most important way to persuade people and to get followers is to do something and people follow you. George Washington stayed at Valley Forge instead of going to the Four Seasons of the Ritz-Carlton. He stayed at Valley Forge with his troops, and they admired what he did. He was staying there suffering with them. So if you're going to be a leader, you have to know where you're going. You have to be able to persuade people to follow you. In my view, it takes a fair amount of humility to be a good leader. Great leaders have humility. Now, we know people who become presidents of the United States, they might not be that humble. But the truth is, Abraham Lincoln had humility. Abraham Lincoln didn't walk around the White House saying, I just wrote the Gettysburg Address. I did it by myself. Or he didn't say, I just won the Civil War by myself. Aren't I great? You can't imagine him signing the Emancipation Proclamation and holding it up and saying, hey, see, I just signed the Emancipation Proclamation. It's just a certain humility that he had, which is one of his admirable qualities. And I think great leaders know that they're not perfect and they have humility.
Do you have a few memorable leaders that you've interviewed?
I've interviewed?
Yeah.
Well, I've interviewed many great leaders in the business world. Warren Buffett very modest guy in terms of what he's accomplished. I've interviewed Jim Baker, who was a great chief of staff for Ronald Reagan and a great Secretary of State, who was actually part of my firm. George Herbert Walker Bush was in my firm for a number of years, and very modest, humble man. I admired him a great deal. Yeah, there's a lot of people I've admired. I've interviewed Oprah Winfrey, who was a great communicator, and she told me something when I interviewed her. She said, "I'm not a great interviewer, I'm a great listener." And to be a good interviewer, you listen to what the person says and then pivot from it and bounce off of it.
Yeah. So here are our questions. All right. In a time when it feels like people are self-serving and focused on personal gain, how do you think we can encourage and promote future philanthropy?
Well, philanthropy is a word derived from an ancient Greek word that means loving humanity. And loving humanity doesn't mean writing checks if you're rich. You can love humanity by giving your time. The most valuable thing you have is your time. You can make more money, you can't make more time. You have a finite amount of time. So I try to encourage people to use their time to give back to society. And you don't have to do what I've done or what other people have done. Find something that's your own niche. Find something that you're really proud of saying you want to be involved with. And give your time. If you have money, you can give that too. But put your effort into it and then stay with it. And then try to put yourself in a position, what can you do to make your country better? What can you do to make your college better, your community better, your state better? And what can you do that would make your parents proud? Now, making your children proud, that's impossible. Children are never going to be proud of parents. But parents are always going to be proud of children. So think about what you might be able to do to make your parents proud of what you've done. They created you. They put you on the face of the earth. You weren't here. We wouldn't be here without them. But what can you do that you can say to them, look what I did to help my country, my community, my college? And that's the perspective I try to do. Look at it. It says, what can I do to do something that justifies my existence on the face of the earth? There are 8 billion of us on the face of the earth. Why are we here? Who knows? But you can find it. You can think about something you can do that makes the world a better place. That's what you should try to do.
Do you feel everyone has a purpose, and do you feel you found yours?
Well, I'm always trying to do more things. I'm diluting myself by trying to do so many different things, and maybe I'd be better off if I did one thing. But I love what I'm doing, and I have a fair amount of intellectual curiosity, and and always trying to do different things. I made myself into an interviewer by doing it in happenstance that I never anticipated, and I try to learn new things and always try to keep my brain sharp. And when you get to be older, all of you here look like you're younger than me. When you get to be older, you're always worried about what's going to give out first, the body or the brain. You don't know. One of them's going to give out. And, I'm trying to keep my brain as sharp as possible. My body, I'm not sure it's going to be that great. I'm not going to be a great athlete, but I can still get around a bit. But, you never know when your brain is going to go. And some people have incredible genetic predispositions to live long. I did a TV series on longevity. And if you have a genetic predisposition to live to be in your 90s or 95, you can smoke, you can drink, you can do all kinds of things. You're probably going to live there. I asked Henry Kissinger when I interviewed him, Henry, you're 98 years old now. You're way overweight. You can't see, you can't hear. You eat Wiener Schnitzel for breakfast. You never exercise a day in your life. How do you be 98? So my parents lived to be in their late 90s, so I didn't have to worry about it. But if you don't have genetic predisposition, you probably should exercise, get a good amount of sleep, hydrate, eat well, don't drink alcohol, certain amount of excess, and other kinds of things. But everybody who gets to a certain age, like mine, wants to live longer. Nobody wants to live shorter. And so the trick is, when you get older, is how can you do things that make you live longer?
All right, we've got a few more minutes and a few more questions left. In business, how do you personally decide when an opportunity is worth the risk versus when discipline means walking away?
Well, I didn't go to business school. I kind of taught myself as a lawyer eventually how to make investments, but I rely on people who actually know what they're doing. So I have investment committees, and I show up in the investment committees, and the people that know what they're doing say it's a good idea. I probably go along with them, but sometimes the ideas don't seem wonderful. But you never know what deal is going to turn out well. When Mark Zuckerberg was in college, my now son-in-law and my daughter were at Harvard then, and they told me about this young guy who was going to start a dating service and was going to show people how to get dates at Harvard, and then going to go to Yale and Princeton. We're going to have the Ivy League, and it was going to be a dating service. And they needed $30,000 to kind of move forward with it. And they asked me if I wanted to put the $30,000 in. I said, I've seen these dating service companies before. They never got anywhere. No. So somebody else in Mark Zuckerberg's class took his bar mitzvah money, put the $30,000 in. It's now worth $51 billion. So that was a mistake.
But we learn from mistakes.
I learned. I mean, Jeff Bezos, when he was starting his company, he came to one of our companies, which had a bibliography of books in print, and said that he needed a bibliography of books in print. He was going to sell books over the internet, and we didn't even know what the internet was. But we said, we don't give out our bibliography that way. He said, well, he would rent it from us, and he would pay us 20% of the company he was going to build. And we said, we don't take illiquid stock in new companies. We'll take cash. So we got $100,000 a year for 5 years. After a couple of years, I said, maybe this company's going to be worth something. Maybe we should go out and get the stock. So I went back and said, Jeff, 2 years ago, we didn't want the stock. Now we'll take the stock. He said, David, that was 2 years ago. You were helpful, but I'm not going to give you 20% of Amazon now. I'll give you 1%. So he gave us 1%, and we sold at the IPO. That was about $20 billion ago. So that was stupid as well. So I made a lot of bad investment decisions, and, what can you do?
This is good, though. We have a room full of college students. This is a lesson,
you never
right?
know
Sometimes we learn
what
from
deal's going to
mistakes.
work out, and I just, I've missed a lot of them, just so many of them. I remember a man who started Netscape, and it was a man named Mark Andreessen. He came to me, he was just out of college, and he came with James Clark, who built Silicon Graphics. They came to my office, and they said, we have figured out a way to navigate the internet. And I said, well, what's the internet? Why would I want to navigate it? And at that time, we didn't know what the internet was. And we turned it down. They wanted some money at a $125 million valuation. We turned it down. We turned it down at $75 million. And then they ultimately sold it for $5 billion to AOL. So I make a lot of mistakes. And so my judgment about what's good or not is not probably the best decider.
I think we have time for one last question, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a follow-up to this. But here's the question. If future historians were writing about the United States 50 years from now, what do you think they would say was the defining political struggle of our era?
Well, 50 years from now, it's hard to predict, because 50 years ago, we wouldn't predicted where we wouldn't have been able to predict where we are now. Sure. But I would say that 50 years from today, almost certainly there'll be a world where China and the United States, as there will probably still be the two dominant economies, geopolitical forces, military forces, and I suspect we will have to deal with the so-called Thucydides trap, whether we ultimately go to a hot war. As you all probably know, if you read the Thucydides trap, a study was done of 20 civilizations where rising power was met by an existing power, and in 15 out of those 20 cases, they went to a hot war, World War II or World War I. And the trap is whether you can actually avoid going to a hot war. And right now, I think we probably won't go to a hot war with China or maybe anybody, because so many wars are going to be done through cyber means and probably not the way we used to fight wars. But again, predicting 50 years ago from today, 50 years ago, no one would have predicted all the things we're now doing. Who would have predicted the internet and artificial intelligence and so things? It's just impossible to predict 50 years out. But I can tell you one thing, 50 years from now, I won't be around to know.
Okay, fair. But maybe how about 4 years from now? So have you ever, I've noticed that publicly you have been very intentional about being fairly non-political.
Right.
Right?
I don't give money to politicians.
Very intentional about that. But I think there are a lot of people, given what's happening in our country right now, who really admire that. Have you been approached, or have you ever thought about running for office?
No.
Or would you? Like maybe 4 years from now?
No. I don't have the charm, the good looks, the other things you need to run, and it's too late now, though I'm still younger than the President of the United States, and I'm younger than the previous President of the United States. But no, I'm not going to do anything like that. I would say, politics is a difficult business these days, because you have to spend half your time raising money, and if you're and you have to worry about President Trump criticizing you. There's a lot of that now. I would say it's a difficult profession to go into. We pay our public servants modest amounts of money. Why there isn't more corruption, I don't know. Because think about it, we're paying our members of Congress, we're paying our Supreme Court justices $220,000, $230,000 a year. It's amazing that we can get pretty good quality people to serve at these salaries. But on the other hand, we have about 80 members of Congress living in their offices because they can't afford an apartment in D.C. because the salary hasn't gone up in more than 20 years. So it's a tough life, and I'd say don't go in the public service as an elected official unless you've made some money before, because otherwise you're not going to be that happy, in my view.
All right. Eisenhower said no at first, too.
Eisenhower said no, but money wasn't a factor then. Eisenhower didn't want to run because he considered he was fairly apolitical, and he didn't want to be running for any office. But in the end, the reason he ran was in 1952, he asked Robert Taft, who was then the leader of the conservative Republican Party, if he would support NATO. And Taft said no. And Eisenhower, who'd fought so hard to preserve Europe, said, if the man isn't going to support NATO, I got to do something about it. And then that's why he ran. If Taft had said he supported NATO, he would have been the Republican nominee in '52, and President Eisenhower probably wouldn't have been president.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Rubenstein.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
David, you said that time is the most precious commodity, and I want to thank you for spending
you.
your precious time with us today. Now, it's a little humbling to do what I'm about to do, given that you have bought the Magna Carta and you have bought the Declaration of Independence, and so this is a thin offer in that respect. But what you should know is that Gettysburg College has one of only 2 German translations of the Declaration of Independence. No, we're not giving you one of the originals, David. I acknowledge that. It is actually currently in the Museum of American Revolution in Philadelphia. But in light of your really compelling history about the Declaration of Independence, your commitment to the values that it represents, we are giving you this replica of the Declaration of Independence in our collection in German, which very much helped this community and surrounding communities understand the importance of the Declaration of Independence. So, David, from us to you, a hearty thank you.
Yes. This is, yes. You're right. The Declaration, you're correct. One of the early copies of the Declaration was printed in German because so many people in Pennsylvania only spoke German in those days. And yes, well, thank you very much.
You can read it for us, too.
Probably not good German, but thank you all for coming, and thank you for listening to my rattle one about American history. And just think about what you can do to help make the country better. Thank you all very much. Okay.
Everyone, before you leave, for our students who are here, at least the first 100 of you, we have copies of Mr. Rubenstein's book, so you can get those on your way out. It's his latest book, The Highest Calling: Conversations on the American Presidency. Thank you so much for coming.
I hope our paths cross again.